And so, colleagues, Stachelle and Jamesetta, I turn to you to offer questions and invite your brief comments. The first question is this to you both. You are natives of Louisville and the West End specifically. In a few sentences, what makes the West End and your neighborhood especially, as well as the West End overall, what makes the West End a special community in which to live and work?
You want to go first?
You want to go first?
Stachelle.
Stachelle.
And then
He
Jamesetta.
picked anyway. Thank you, Dr. Pollard. What makes it special, I guess, is two people right here sitting here who are in it, who are from it. But the West End of Louisville is what I would call probably the most resilient community in this city. It's probably the largest, and I don't know if many of you know, but it's 9 neighborhoods that make up what they call the West End. Really, when you cross the west side of Ninth, they say, you coming on to the west side. What I've seen, especially in the ways that our city has almost torn apart, and I promised Dr. Pollard I'd behave, so I promise y'all I'm gonna try my best. But I've seen such a resilience. Those people, our people, us, we've been displaced. Our neighborhoods and communities have been gentrified. We don't have any grocery stores. We don't have a lot of shopping centers. There's not many job opportunities. And somehow, some way, we are people who are still surviving. And we, when you think of this community of achievers and believers, we've lived through some stuff. We've lived through chemical plants being in our neighborhoods. We've survived these things, having skin conditions because of the toxicity in our environment. We survive when our schools are not doing so well. We survive when our education hasn't been so quality. We survive when we got to go to convenience stores because that's what we have, and the bread might be stale. We survive off Vienna sausages and stuff because that's what we can afford. And somehow, some way, our grannies and stuff, they be living to be 95. You know, and they was cooking chicken with lard and shortening and hot water cornbread. And if some of y'all don't know what I'm talking about, y'all need to come sit with me for Thanksgiving.
All right.
But it's such a resilient community. And so that's why I think it's a special place to be, because after everything that's been done to us, we are still standing.
Amen.
All right. Speak truth, my sister. Jamesetta.
Well, Dr. Pollard, I agree with Stachelle. It is a resilient people in Russell. I had the benefit of spending many of my youth in Russell, and the people are resilient beyond all odds against them. When you are in a community where people will say to you, the biggest expectation for us is for us to fail. And you hear that, and you know that they are resilient and are ready to go on and love on no matter what. They love hard. They care for one another. There's a misconception in the West End that people don't care about one another, but they care about one another, and they help each other, and they are a resilient people, ready to just achieve the same thing that everyone else in Louisville wants to achieve and has the ability to achieve. So resilience and ability to love beyond what is afforded to them.
Thank you, Jamesetta. And let me just say, as we go into these questions, how much of an honor it is for me to be participating in this session with all three of our sisters on this panel, co-moderating with Chandra, and to be here with Jamesetta and Stachelle. I'm so very proud to know all of them. And I know for those of you who are meeting them for the very first time, you are equally feeling the burn of what they are bringing to us this morning. The next question speaks, I think, equally directly to you, Jamesetta and Stachelle. And I would ask you to take a little time and talk about one thing that has best prepared you to meet the challenges of anti-racist repair. Describe your own contributions to transformation in our city. And Jamesetta, if you'd like to start this time, and then we'll come to Stachelle.
I began my work as pastor at St. Peter's United Church of Christ in 2006. And at that time, when I and my husband arrived there, there were 15 German descendant senior adults there. And when my husband and I walked through the door, one person got up and left and said, "I'm not going to worship with people that look like you." And that could have dealt a blow where I would have stopped doing ministry. But as a result of that, I used that as an opportunity to open the doors of the church so that people that looked like me could come in and begin to worship. It was an opportunity for those 14 remaining senior adults to understand that these were real people. All they had ever read about and seen was what they had seen on the news or read in the newspaper. And so there was a lot of fear and a lot of concern about integrating the church. And so we began to have those sacred conversations, those conversations that said we're more alike than we are different, those conversations that said that this is the church, this is the responsibility of the church to reach the people who are hurting, those people who have been oppressed, those people that are in need. And so transformation began, Dr. Pollard, when we opened the doors and began to recognize that we could make a difference in our community. And I think that is something that is needed all across Jefferson County. That's what is needed all across the United States for us to open those doors and to break down those constructed barriers and boundaries that keep us separated. And it begins with dealing through communication, but it also means that we've got to be truth tellers and begin to understand that those constructed barriers is what is keeping us divided and from being able to become who God has called us to be.
Thank you. Thank you. Stachelle?
I was going to ask you to ask the question again, but I think I got it.
You got it?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I've had several moments, but I think one in particular that I can remember, and this one I was at the prestigious seminary. I remember in it wasn't when I didn't think I couldn't pass Hebrew, because that was rough. But I had a moment there too. But I think it was 2019 when I thought, I was like, this cannot be it. I was probably at the lowest I could be. And for maybe 40-something days, I couldn't eat solid food. Like all of a sudden something happened to my stomach, right? And I was like, who is this God that, like, grandmama and them, because that ain't working for me right now. And I remember having to take my J-term class in and out of the hospital, going back and forth, being very, very nervous about like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get kicked out of school. I had just these weird things happening, but it was the one moment that I remember after that when I remember one thing from those 40 days. I remember I was taking my class, and I remember that Dr. Justin Reed now talked about the rise of prophets and kingship at the same time. Then, that's all I remember too from the hospital, but it was that semester that followed that, being in Dr. Mumford's class, reading a book by Dr. Marvin McMickle called Where Have All the Prophets Gone? Something shook in me. I read the book in 2 days. I for real, I did. But what it said was the response to our world is the voice of the prophet. And I got to be very, very clear, because the only thing I knew about prophecy at that point was like, if you give $10, you should get 1,000, and that was kind of weird, but that's the only thing I knew. But what he talked about was the remnant, that the voice of the prophet would be the response to a culture or a community in crisis. Mm-hmm. What we couldn't do, and in this book, he talked about how people who do things like God in America, like there's no God and nothing, it's just God. And he talked about in these things where we get in our churches and we get so comfortable, then we start praising our praise in our cute buildings, but when we leave and go into communities that are war zones. And that was some kind of reckoning in me that said, first of all, it taught me that I wasn't crazy, because I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong, like growing up in the West End, being poor, but it was only seemed like this prosperity was working for one person. Like, we would give everything we had to the church, but then we would go home and wouldn't have our basic needs. Mm-hmm. Like, something was wrong with that. So I was 15 years old when I thought something was wrong. Mm-hmm. So this reckoning was years later when I read that book, and I said, oh my goodness, I don't feel as crazy anymore. What I then decided that I was going to take the call of being the remnant, the prophetic voice that literally would disrupt every single system that was keeping people oppressed. And so that was kind of my moment of somebody snapping or something. Right. It's okay. But those are the moments. And then if I could say that one thing led me to the big thing last year, it wasn't those people in the protests, it was us. And I was on the front with them every single day. And I wouldn't have been anywhere else. And so that was kind of, you said one thing, but I had to kind of take you through that so you can know my journey, Dr. Pollard, as if you didn't know, but they didn't know it. So.
Amen.
It is one thing. Thank you, Stachelle and Jamesetta. It is one thing. Our life has moments, but those moments add up to one thing. So thank you for expounding eloquently, Stachelle.
Yes.
This question is one that I think speaks broadly to our audience as well as to our panelists. Stachelle, I'll begin with you on this one. Describe how churches and the faith community, the temple, the mosque, the synagogue, as well as other houses of worship, describe how the faith community within and beyond the West End is making a difference there.
Maybe for the last 5 months, I have been the kind of community chaplain network coordinator working alongside Judd Hendricks at Interfaith Path to Peace. And sometimes, as sad as I am about how the church responds, I am absolutely proud of how the church and other faith leaders and other faith communities have responded to this crisis. If nothing else, I think it moved us from safe conversations to honest ones. And I think it's probably very, very hard sitting in something like this, but it's making us have intentional interactions. It's making us be intentional about our conversation. It's making us not be as safe anymore. It's making us ask questions before we tell somebody you pretty for a black girl. It's making us say things. It's making us recognize who we've been and who we are. And I think our community, our faith community, all of our faith leaders, from the Buddhist to the Jew, from the Christian to the, I think we have all just said we are going to be intentional about having real, honest conversations, but also going a step further and going to have relationships, because that means something. It's the same thing would happen if we just said, okay, we know it's there, but we did nothing about it. The same thing would happen if we knew we were in a racial reckoning and people say, okay, but then we're still going to have a panel and it's not going to include women or black people. But what I think the faith community as a whole has done and is doing and trying to do, most of us anyway, some people probably not, but most of us, I think, are responding in a way that says we can no longer be the same way we are. And that's just not for white people. That's for black people too. Us looking at our complacency of captivity, right? Some of us have just been complacent. Some of us have been complacent in our captivity, have been complacent in our code switching, have been complacent when we walk past a white person just to move because that's what we've been taught. And so some of us have been complacent in our captivity. Some of us have been complacent in our capitalism and how we benefit from it. Other of us have been complacent in our comfortability, right? And so I think this moment has given us all a chance to respond. And I think for the most part, we're doing it well.
Okay. Thank you, Stachelle. Jamesetta?
I think that as faith communities in the West End and all around Louisville, we are getting better. Yeah. We're beginning to have that dialogue so that, excuse me, thank you. We're beginning to have that dialogue where we're able to communicate with one another about what is needed to be changed. For me, faith is an action word. I think I heard Dean Bradley say that the other day. And so many times what we have done in our churches, we've talked about what needs to be done, but we have not put that into action. And so we're beginning to see more of our faith communities in the West End work together, not in competition with one another, because sometimes we're so busy being competitive where we're trying to get that membership or those tithes and offering that we forget what the real work is for us to do. And that is to help one another, help those in our community, help those who are oppressed, help those that need a hand up and not just a hand out, help to live the gospel in a way that is going to make a tangible difference in the people that we serve. And so we're beginning to see more of that. But we also know that we don't have the resources in the African American community to do that hard work, to do some of that justice work, to do some of that economic development, to do those things. And so we need our brothers and sisters in the other faith communities to step up to work with us, not to lord over us, but to work with us in doing that difficult work in our community. So the faith communities are beginning to make a difference. And as Stachelle, you said, not just white faith communities, but black faith communities as well. All of us coming together on one accord, realizing that there's much work for all of us to do.
Thank you. Thank you both. I hear intimations of considerable hope in the responses that you have just given, and that is indeed gratifying to hear. I would also say that even with those intimations of hope, we still have a lot more work that lies before us. And that leads to this question: what changes need to be made to work toward ending racism in Louisville? Not just the West End, but Louisville. And if you'd like to address this part of the question, what Black Louisville needs to bring about repair, please feel free to do so. But certainly the most important part of that question is about what is the city, what changes need to be happening here. And with our mayor present, I'm sure that he will be all ears among all the rest of us.
Oh, wow.
Stachelle, you want to start off with that one?
Whew. Yep.
Yes.
So loaded. I get to see things differently because somehow I have became the exception for my community, and they trust me, right? So when I leave y'all, I gotta go back home, and they probably watching, so I gotta make sure I'm careful because they'll be knocking on my door. But what I'll be honest, careful but honest. There were people who were marching alongside me in that protest who are still fighting charges, using every resource they have. 200-something people are still fighting charges because they stood up for something. We get to have conversations while they get to be convicted felons. And that's the stuff that hangs on my shoulders, right? And I think the leadership in the city had a huge reckoning, right, and did some things, right? And I don't know if many of you saw. Don't go back and watch the tape. But it was hard getting on the civilian review board. But, and I accept the responsibility. And our city is making changes. But in a way, people are still paying for things that people are profiting off of, right? People are on house arrest for rioting charges when they were standing next to me. People are locked up fighting charges right now. So the first thing the city of Louisville could do is probably drop the charges against the people who are the very reason we're in here right now. The second thing that this city needs to do, all 81 of the cities within the city, is to begin to have these conversations that are cross communities. White churches need to be talking to black churches. Black churches need to be talking to white churches. People need to be going to temples. People need to be going to mosque. We need to be having real conversations because I think God, in whatever form, is excited about a humanity that works together, that is about communal justice.
Yes.
Right? And so we have got to have conversations that don't just end in conversations, but begin in action. And I said this, somebody asked me yesterday, I deal with a weird tension because people are very, very, in speech and in presentation, are very, very liberation, are very, very let's be together. But people can't seem to take that presentation and make it practical. You cannot cry liberation, but then when you leave here, you don't never take a drive to the West End. You can't understand it. You cannot say we want to be these things. And that's the thing with our community. In Louisville, what is the fourth most segregated city in the nation? That's real, right? And that's an honest statistic. And you want to know why? Because we can leave here, we can drive together, and I will take you to where most of the poor people are. They're going to be condensed in one group, and we can drive, and it's going to be wide. And that's what they call the West End of Louisville. That's where all the poor people are. Now, okay, I'm saying all. That's where 90% of the poor people are. Those people are living at the poverty level or below it. You're talking about, 40,000 people, or however many people live in these 9 or 10 communities, right? And suffering for violence, right? And the symptoms what racism has done to us. Now we are all living in a city where we feel unsafe. And what we have to do as a city, as a church community, as faith leaders, is we have to stop being reactive and start being proactive. What can we do now? What conversations can we have now? What can we do beyond conversations to be anti-racist? What can we do for our city? What nonprofit are you giving to? It's a shameless plug. Give it to the Hope Bus. I don't know. But I'm saying, what nonprofit are you giving to? If you're a funder in here, are you giving to the things that make you comfortable, or are you giving to the things that are creating real change? If you have resources, are you giving those resources to the people who are walking these streets at night? I'm talking about me, okay? Yeah, are you giving the resources? And we have to take care. And lastly, I'm done, Dr. Pollard, I promise. Lastly, we have got to not just be compassionate city because we have it in our name. We have got to care about the most vulnerable population in our society right now, and that is our group of houseless folks. People are on the streets when we have empty buildings and vacant houses. People are on the streets. People are in the cold. And then it becomes a responsibility of the grassroots people like me and Dr. Ferguson to care for the people who are victims of a system that was created. And we run all of our resources out trying to be caretakers. And our city, all of us have a responsibility. If we want to be anti-racist, if we want to be compassionate, if we want to be real about equity, if we want to be real about justice, all of us have a responsibility to be healers and stop trying to be heroes. And that's all I got to say. That's it.
Thank you, Stachelle, for
I almost stood up. I almost stood up there. I sat back
watching
down.
your words and cutting to the chase. Jamesetta?
I want to offer a different perspective because we are in a community, in the Russell community, where we have learned that about $85 million flows outside of our community annually. When that $85 million leaves, those are tax dollars that fund our schools, that fund our roads and all of the infrastructure. And that comes as a result of disinvestment in our community. First, to dismantle racism, we've got to have those who are in power to acknowledge that they helped create the institution of racism. And until that happens, that's the truth. And until that happens, we cannot begin to repair what is broken. And so that's the first thing. But the other part of it is those who are in power are the ones who are able to make changes in those institutions that affect the West End of Louisville. And so we need those power brokers to help us to change, to invest. I think in July when we opened our building, I think I heard the mayor say that that was the first new investment west of Jefferson in over 50 years. How many communities in Jefferson County only have an investment in 50 years? We opened a restaurant. There are 2 sit-down restaurants in a community of Russell that has 10,000 plus residents. So there are power brokers that need to intentionally make an investment in the West End, because that is what is going to help to restore our communities. That is what is going to help to change where we can all begin to share in that that unity and that common goal to restore Louisville, where we all feel like that we are being treated justly, and we all want to be a part of. When we talk about a compassionate city, compassion goes beyond just saying I empathize with you, I care about it, but it means making a tangible investment in the people within the community. And so we got to be able to tell the truth and admit that we're complicit
Yes.
in racism. We've got to offer people of color, people from the West End, and those who are underserved a seat at the table so that they can begin to use their stories and their struggles and to make a difference. But we also need you to walk alongside of us. Yeah. So many times money is put in, Dr. Alton, money is put in and it's a one-time deal.
Yeah, just one.
You know, but it needs to be a constant flow of investment in our community so that we can build Black wealth, so that we can improve our schools, so that we can have the amenities and the resources that others in Jefferson County has. And those things go a long way with improving the conditions in our city.
Yeah.
Wow, powerful. Thank you, Jamesetta. Thank you, powerful. So I am mindful, everyone, of the time. So Chandra, I don't know if I have time for one more question. Do I have time? Yes?
I think we're getting
okay,
close.
I'm not hearing.
I think we're getting close. Looking at the time.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well,
One more question?
I'm going to pose the question, and I'm going to ask Jamesetta and Stachelle if you would answer it very, very, very briefly.
Very, very quickly.
You got it.
Imagine 10 years from now, the West End is thriving. What is happening? What does repair look like? How did we get there? Very briefly.
It means having a grocery store in our community. It means having financial institutions other than the pawn shops for people to go and to cash checks. It means having restaurants and schools where people have an opportunity to bring their families and get quality education. It means having access to networking and all of those things that everybody else in our community has. And in 10 years, it means everybody has a piece of the pie, that they feel like they are entitled to it, not just hoping that somebody gives it to them, but that they generally feel that they deserve it and can get it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, colleagues. And I turn the floor back over to you who are
We
in
didn't
the
get a
studio.
response from Stachelle.
He knew.
Oh, Stachelle.
He understood.
I thought I heard grocery store. Okay.
To add to that, I'd just like to see in 10 years our kids playing again. I like to see,
Thank
be
you.
able to go somewhere and have ice cream because we can't go nowhere and have ice cream.
That's right.
And I like to be able to walk out my door and go get a chili dog from a mom and pop store because the neighborhood is thriving. Actually,
right.
I would like to, when we drive to the Western, I would be like, now you're entering into the city of West Louisville.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
10 years from now. Remember I said that.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Ashe, amen, amen.
Amen.
Amen.